Go chasing waterfalls. Please stick to the rivers and the lakes that you're used to. I know that you're gonna have it your way or nothing at all. But I think you're moving too fast.
This session is being recorded. This will be used as part of our ongoing Philadelphia research project, and what people say during this session may be used anonymously as part of our research. You can contact Gabriel at communityvoiceconsulting.com if anyone has any concerns about their info being used. You can contact him directly. Welcome, everyone. We're excited to have Philadelphia's very first Meet the Farmer event, and we're happy to have you all join us. You can all refer to the chat for Gabriel Cummings' email address for any concerns about the voice for the recording. Before we start, we would like to ask everyone to follow some ground rules. Can you please change your name to be your name and your pronouns? For some folks, you may be able to click on your video and there will be 3 dots, drop menu will pop up and you can click rename and you'll be able to rename yourself. For example, you can, if your name's Erica and you go by she, her pronouns, you can write your name Erica, brackets, she, her. And for others, you may be able to access that in the chat. I'll give everyone a minute to change your name and your pronouns. And while you're doing that, I'm just going to continue to go down the ground rules. Please remain muted. Everyone should be muted now, besides myself and Lisa, but please remain muted. There'll be time to have a discussion after the presentation. Later, we're going to invite everyone into the community discussion by showing your beautiful faces. But for now, if you can turn off your cameras until after the presentation, that'd be much appreciated. We also invite you to introduce yourself into the chat by typing your name, your pronoun, and your relationship to Philadelphia or Oysters. And we are also going to spotlight people. So we ask that everyone use their speaker view. It's usually on the top right under the word view. I'll give everyone a minute to kind of find that out and figure it out. To give everyone an idea of how the next hour and a half will go, we're going to watch a video with a field trip to Sweet Amalia Oyster Farm. We will then have an opportunity to hear and meet Lisa Calvo, the oyster farmer. Following that, we will have a Q&A with Lisa. She will then share a shucking demonstration and talk about safe handling and nutrition facts. And we will all join together and talk with her as an open discussion. We will then end the information session on how to join your our oyster club, as well as sign up for the spring Philadelphia season. We will also let you know how to stay in contact with Lisa Calvo and Sweet Amalia. We invite you to enter any questions as they come up in the chat. So for the next slide, for a little context before this video starts, we planned a field trip to visit Sweet Amalia and we expected about 10 customers. But once one of our students told her mom's friends via WeChat, that small group quickly became 80+ people. So we rented 2 school buses. We picked up from our 2 school locations, one in North Philly, the other in South Philly. We hired a translator and we headed to Cape May. We have a short 4-minute video to show you that experience.
I'm just very excited to go to the oyster farm and see what an oyster farm actually is. Like, what is an oyster farm? Like,
I grew up in Philadelphia, so Jersey Shore is kind of like synonymous with Philly, but I've never actually been to Cape May that I can recall. But I've been all up and down the Jersey Shore.
I am thrilled to have you here.
这位是 Lisa Calvo， 她很欢迎大家来这边。
I am the owner of Sweet Amalia Oyster Farm.
她是这边的老板。
I am also a marine scientist with Rutgers University.
她还是科学家，是跟 Rutgers 学校的。
What about the So this is a blue crab. This is actually a juvenile.
Yes.
And it's a male.
And it's male. Yeah.
So you guys know how to tell if it's a male or a female?
Real soft. You don't want to tear the paper.
You have to just be very gentle with it, right? It's going to bend itself up. So we use go out here all the time. The other site was a little closer to shore. This winter was so bad, we definitely lost 40% of the stock.
Because they're open or?
They're open and you'll be able to hear it. So they sound clunky. They sound like mixed. And those don't actually look all that bad. You know what? Let's take a look and make sure that they're alive.
Yes.
So this was a really amazing day. I loved working with Fishadelphia. I loved the way Talia is working with high school students to engage the students in an idea around sustainable seafood.
Like to be able to have literally see how oysters are born and get bigger. That was amazing and to learn. But it was also amazing to see people who probably don't get to the beach, just play in the sand and be amazed by being out there.
Yeah, I think the customers really get to see where their food is coming from, their seafood is coming from. They get to see how it's harvested, the place, and get to meet the people and who they're supporting.
The food was great, and also actually going out to the farm, the oyster farm, it was very informative. Learned things I never knew anything about. It was really interesting.
I thought an oyster farm would be like oysters, but they would be underwater. We had to look underwater.
I didn't know there were going to be cages for the oysters. I thought they were just just brought up from the ground.
So everything else that happened during the course of the day was really nice, but what I liked the most was how everybody was interacting with everybody. Then when the first time that we went down to the beach and actually seeing all of the different live creatures that's in the sea.
All right, hang on. I got the whole.
That trip was such a success. We can't wait until we were able to do another one. Welcome again, everyone, to our first Meet the Farmer event with oyster farmer Lisa Calvo. Good afternoon. My name is Tasha Palacio. I'm the Youth Development Coordinator with Fishadelphia and today's moderator. I would like to thank you all for joining us today at our first virtual Meet the Farmer event with our special guest, owner and oyster farmer of Sweet Amalia Oyster Farm, Lisa Calvo. Fishadelphia students and staff work hard and take pride in connecting communities, and some of our goals with Fishadelphia is to make sure our customers know where their food comes from and how to care for it, and also promoting the connection, understanding, and solidarity between and within eating and fishing communities, along with some of our values being serve, build, and connect diverse communities, support sustainable regional fisheries, and promote learning all around. Fishadelphia believes events like this will touch on a few of our goals, but more importantly, provide you all with some really new and cool information on how oysters get to your table, or in some cases, skip the table and right into your mouth. For some of those who are in the Oyster Club, you may already know what I'm talking about. Some of you already know that we source our oysters from Sweet Amalia Oyster Farm in Cape May, New Jersey. Lisa Calvo is the owner and runs Sweet Amalia. Lisa will talk to us today about her origin story and how she got into shellfish aquaculture and how she runs her farm. We will have a Q&A after her presentation, and then we will watch the oyster shucking demonstration from Lisa's friend, Chef Eli Collins. Eli recorded his video for us in Philly today. We will also learn some safe handling techniques and nutritional information after that video. And we will have time for another Q&A and an open discussion. And we ask that you use the chat box, which I see that there's a bunch of action going on, which is fantastic. Yeah, keep using the chat box. Use it for any questions that you may have, or wait until our open Q&A to ask Lisa yourself, whichever you prefer. So without further ado, I'd like to present Sweet Amalia's very own Lisa Calvo.
Tasha, thank you so much for that kind introduction, and thank everyone for joining this evening. Appreciate you attending. And I have to say, I've been so impressed with Philadelphia and what the students have done, and the team do such great work to bring sustainably fished and farmed foods, seafoods to the Philadelphia community. So hats off to you all. So I'm going to share a PowerPoint presentation, and so that you'll be able to get a better visualization of our day-to-day on the farm. And along that course, I'm going to introduce you to some different aspects about oyster farming, and hopefully it'll be a little bit educational and a lot of fun. Okay, so just bear with me a moment as I share my screen. We good? Not yet.
Lisa, we want
there we go. Is that good?
Yes, perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. Got it.
So a little bit about your visit to the farm. That was such a fun day, and I really enjoyed meeting you all, and have really fond memories of that. It was quite an experiment. I wasn't really sure. You know, I knew we could handle 10, 15, 20 people, but when 80 people showed up, that was definitely, you know, a new experience for me. So thank you for joining, and it was really a great pleasure to have you all. So my farm is Sweet Amalia Oyster Farm, and it's located in Cape May County, New Jersey. I am the owner of the farm. And a little bit about me. I have two children, Amalia, who the farm is named after, and my son Gabriel on the left there. I grew up in New Jersey, in southern New Jersey, in the Vineland area, and loved going to the beach as a child. So I guess I've always had kind of sand between my toes, and oyster farming fits that quite fine. We actually started the farm back in the early 2000s in Virginia. My husband and I were then working and living along the Chesapeake Bay. And that's Amalia there. So she was just a toddler at that time and just loved eating oysters fresh from the water. So that was really fun. And our life took some turns, and we returned to New Jersey. So it was a return home for me. And sometime later, we were excited about starting the farm again. So the farm that was started in Mobjack Bay, just off the Chesapeake Bay in a tributary, relocated to New Jersey and was kind of reborn. And that passion came to life once again. So I came to oyster farming through a career in marine sciences. And, you know, as a child, I grew up and I knew I wanted to be a marine biologist. When I was young, one of the prominent TV shows was The Undersea World of Jacques Cousteau. And, you know, we got to travel around the world with this oceanographer's exploration. And so I guess that planted a seed. And fortunate for me, after I finished my undergraduate degree, I was searching for a job in marine sciences, and I landed at a small laboratory at Rutgers University called the Haskin Shellfish Research Laboratory. And that laboratory is actually located on the Delaware Bay shore in a town called Bivalve. And that town was named Bivalve because it was the center of New Jersey's oyster fleet and industry. And the laboratory had a long history dating back to the late 1800s. And the laboratory was sited there because there was this tremendously significant and important fishery, the oyster fishery of New Jersey. And the laboratory was there to serve that that fishery and to ensure that the oyster resource was managed with the best scientific resources behind it. So there's a long tradition at that laboratory, and this is a view from the dock just outside the back door. What you see in the front field is a contemporary oyster boat. And then in the back is the A.J. Meerwald, which is now New Jersey's tall ship, but was once an oyster schooner when schooners sailed under sail and all the harvesting was done by sail. So very historic place, a very historic mission. And it really brought me into contact with the maritime culture of the region and that very rich history and all the folklore and ideas around oystering and oyster fishing and oyster farming. So I really was captivated by that position at that job as fresh out of college, undergraduate, graduate who was working as a technician at this research laboratory. And it really shaped my life. So interesting how things turn. So, I mean, I don't even know that I ate an oyster before I started working there. Certainly have a strong and rich tradition of seafood eating and food appreciation through my Italian heritage. But that oyster business was really quite new for me. So after a few years at the laboratory, I went on to Virginia to work in the Chesapeake Bay, where I continued to study oysters, and I got my graduate degree in marine science, a master's degree. And I worked on various projects focusing on oysters and oyster diseases. The populations of oysters along the east coast of the United States were devastated by an outbreak of diseases that affect the oysters, they don't affect humans, but they affected the oysters. And so there was a lot of research around understanding the diseases and learning how to manage around them. And one of the things that we did in those research efforts was work to breed an oyster that would be resistant to those diseases. Just like you might breed disease-tolerant corn or a tomato that has long shelf life or whatever. It was just very basic, natural selective breeding. And it takes time. It takes years and years and years and decades. And I was part of a research team that had been working on that. And there were some breakthroughs during my time that I was working with them. And that really opened the door for oyster farming along the east coast of the United States. Because you now had this oyster that was specially adapted for our area, could tolerate the diseases without dying, and would make oyster farming profitable. So that's kind of a long story around how I came to be interested in oyster farming. So oyster farming is a form of aquaculture. And aquaculture is basically farming in an aquatic environment. It could be seaweed, it could be salmon, it could be tilapia, it could be shellfish. And globally, aquaculture is rapidly increasing. This chart on the left actually shows sort of a leveling off of wild capture fisheries. So you have fishermen or fisherwomen who will go out and catch wild populations of fish. And that fishery level has pretty much been leveled since, about the 1970s. But you'll see the orange shows how aquaculture continues to rise globally. And that's really going to be important as we continue to increase our populations, and it'll be an important source of sustainably produced food to meet food needs. In the US, aquaculture has lagged behind other countries, but it's still significant. And this 2018 publication shows that oysters are actually the #1 species produced by aquaculture in the United States. So nationally, there is a marine aquaculture strategic plan that was put forth by the Obama administration, and that really called for a 50% increase in aquaculture in the US during this 4-year period leading up to this year. And reasons for that, there was a recognition of the importance of the food production, the importance as an economic stimulus for job creation, important for restoring species and habitats that had been under decline. So a very important sector and a growing sector now in the United States. So it's kind of exciting to be a part of this increasing emphasis on sustainably produced aquacultured products. Okay, now we're going to transition and talk a little bit specifically about Sweet Amalia Oyster Farm. Many of you, if you're a member of the Oyster Club at Fishadelphia, you've seen these little bags of oysters, and hopefully you've enjoyed them quite a bit. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we actually produce these oysters and what it's like to be an oyster farmer. Okay, so our farm, we strive to produce very high quality oysters. We work very hard to ensure that they're as best they can be, that they're healthy oysters, and that they taste delicious and they look pretty. We have a model where we are farm to table or tied to table, as some might consider it. So we direct delivery to our customers, and our primary market is restaurants in Philadelphia, and we have a few in Cape May County along the Jersey Shore. But up until this year, we had really had a major focus on restaurant sales and not so much on retail. So Fishadelphia was really our first venture into selling to markets that directly market to consumers. And that was really exciting to enter into that area. So some of the restaurants we work with in Philadelphia are listed here and also in New Jersey. Again, it's very exciting for us when we see our product that we're so proud of to be present on menus in some of Philadelphia's best restaurants. And that has like a really special, rewarding feeling when you know your product is appreciated. And then when you hear from customers that they enjoyed your oysters, that's pretty neat. Okay, we encourage the clients that we sell to, our restaurants and their staffs, to come out to the farm and spend a day working with us so they can understand how the oysters are produced and gain a better appreciation of what it's like to grow an oyster. And then they can communicate that to their customers. And I think that's really important to me, that there's kind of an understanding of what oyster farming and aquaculture looks like and how these oysters get from the bay to the table. And I think that's what's so cool about Fishadelphia, is that if you participate in that, you get to learn about the seafoods that you're eating, how they were caught, how they were produced, how they were handled. And that's a really very exciting thing, I think. Okay, we've had the opportunity to work on a number of events with our restaurants. This is an outside, out in the field farm dinner that was set up actually on a farm in Bucks County. And, it's very fun to be working, teaming up with seafood produced by aquaculture and terrestrial farms where they're growing crops, and then putting that all together on one table and working with some really fantastic chefs to make that happen. So kind of giving you the end product first here. I've never actually tried this in a presentation before. I usually start from the babies, but we're doing it in reverse tonight. Okay. Fortunate for oyster farmers around the United States, there is an oyster renaissance happening right now, where there's a lot of strong interest in trying oysters and eating oysters, enjoying oysters. I've been really impressed that people of all ages will eat oysters, and there's a lot of excitement around that. There are about 1,000 oyster farms along the east coast of the United States. And so we're just one of those many farms. Some are very large, producing millions a year, and others are just small boutique style farms like mine, where you might produce, 50,000 to 300,000 oysters a year. And that's, each farm has their own place, their own method, and their own story. So I think that brings a lot of excitement to eating oysters when you can think about those aspects and explore and try different types of oysters produced by different farms. And they'll look and taste very different from one another, depending on who's producing them and where they're grown. Okay, so one of the things that's so neat about oyster eating is that not unlike, grapes and wines, that where the grape is grown influences how the wine is going to taste. Oysters sort of are the same way. So with wine, we call that terroir. And with oysters, we call that merroir, coming from the sea. So each oyster is influenced by its flavor profile is influenced by the place it's grown. And so you can have very, very salty, briny oysters in areas that are close to the ocean. And then you can have sweeter, milder oysters in oysters that are more in the estuary or more up bay. So again, that contributes to, this interest and curiosity about eating oysters and trying different types and enjoying different flavor profiles. Okay, so let's talk about the place of Sweet Amalia. Our oysters are grown in the lower Delaware Bay, the southern portion of the Delaware Bay, in Cape May County on the Cape May Peninsula, in an area known as the Cape Shore Flats. We're about 8 miles from the mouth of the bay, where the Delaware Bay meets the Atlantic Ocean. So there's a lot of influence of the high salinity, the very salty ocean water will exchange into the bay each day. And that will influence the amount of salt and character of the oysters. And we're about 20 miles south down the bay from the traditional oyster fishery on the docks at Bivalve. Okay. The type of environment we're in is very unique and special. It's an intertidal area. So the two images you see here of the same area, the top image is showing the area at the high tide, and the bottom image is showing what the area looks like at low tide. So there's this very large tide range, sweeping tides that will leave the bay bottom exposed to air at low tide. And that's pretty unique for a 6-mile stretch of the Delaware Bay in this lower portion of New Jersey side of the Delaware Bay. So that kind of environment, that type of situation where you have these exposed sand flats, which are only exposed at the low tide, is ideal for a system of oyster farming called rack and bag. And what we do is we have steel racks that we place on the bay bottom, and then we put the oysters in mesh bags that are secured to those racks. And we're able to tend those bags on the low tide. So that gives us usually a 4-hour window to actually get out there and work. But that window is influenced by the cycle of the tide, which is influenced by the moon and then influenced by the weather. So if you're going to be an oyster farmer in this type of situation, you live by the tides. Your time you're going to go out to the farm is going to change every day by 1 hour. So today, the crew was able to get out at, I think, 3 o'clock. And that, unfortunately, in the wintertime means that we're going to bump into darkness, and we're only going to get to work half the tide before it gets dark. So you have to be a little bit flexible for sure if you're an oyster farmer. And a lot of times you think there's going to be a very big low tide, and you're going to get a lot of time on the farm based on the predictions of the tide charts. But then you get out there and the wind and the storms decide something else is going to happen. So yeah, it definitely requires a lot of flexibility. So all of our oysters begin their lives in an oyster hatchery. And in the bottom right image there, you can see a very large space with lots of tanks and plumbing. And that is the Rutgers University Oyster Hatchery, known as the Aquaculture Innovation Center, where we often get our young seed or our baby oysters. We call them seed. So that hatchery or any hatchery will have a certain stock that they're going to produce the babies from. And I talked about the selective breeding and the genetic breeding. So the stocks that we like to use for our farm are actually stocks that were developed at our location. So they're ideally situated for that exposure to air on the low tide. They're disease resistant. They grow fast and they have pretty shell coloration. So that's what we look for when we're purchasing seed. So the hatchery staff will take these oysters as mature adults, and those oysters will produce eggs and sperm, and then they'll be triggered to release those eggs with a temperature change. And the eggs will become fertilized and they'll be collected, and then they'll develop into larvae. And the oyster will have a 3-week period where these baby microscopic larvae are swimming and floating in these large tanks in this hatchery situation. And then eventually they'll settle down and they'll develop the hard shell. Now, if they were in nature, in the wild, they would actually glue themselves to a hard surface, preferably another oyster, and permanently attach to that oyster. In the hatchery, they can be settled on very fine microscopic chips of shell, so that when you grow them up, they grow up as individual oysters. And that enables the farmer to better control how they shape as they grow up and keep a nice uniform oyster that presents well for the half shell or the raw bar trade. So here you can see in the top right are they're called eyed larvae. You can see those little black spots. These are microscopic. You would not be able to see them with your naked eye at all. Maybe they would look like just a little tiny, smaller than a pinpoint speck of black in a, you'd have thousands, hundreds of thousands of them in a beaker. So that's the stage right before they're ready to metamorphose and develop that hard shell. So as the oyster grows, it grows not only its interior, which is the meat of the oyster, but it's also growing its shell. So it's building that edge out and it's building the shell thicker as it's growing. So ideally for planting on the farm, we like the oysters, maybe the size of a dime. So in between this phase and the hatchery, there's a nursery phase. And a lot of people are able to hold the baby oysters or the seed on land-based systems where they can control them better and keep an eye on them. The case of our farm, we don't have that situation. So we take the seed oysters and we are developing best methods to hold them directly in the field. And that's a little more challenging because there are a lot of variables you can't control like you could do on land. So this year, our seed that we got were just 2 millimeters in size. So that's, it's a much less than 1/4 of an inch. Very, very tiny. They look like sand grains when they first come to the farm. And we maintain them in containers that have a very, very fine mesh. So once they get to the farm, if they're this size, which is probably a little bit smaller than a dime, they can go into these mesh bags. And you can see here, they're still pretty tight, fine mesh squares. So the idea is you want the bag size to be half the size, the mesh to be half the size of the oysters so that the oysters will stay in and be retained inside the cage and not fall through. as the oysters grow, as these babies grow, we will sieve them on screens and try and separate fast growers from slow growers, and then reposition them into a new bag. So one of the things you're always trying to do on the farm is to move to the next size up, so that there's plenty of water flowing through the oysters and they can get the food they need. So on the oyster farm, we're only putting in the oysters and the gear. We're not adding any kind of food. They're just feeding naturally on what's occurring in the water. And that's like algae, phytoplankton, tiny, tiny microscopic particles that they'll consume. And they can consume and filter 50 gallons of water a day as they're doing this. And as they're doing that, they're removing these particles and they're actually improving the water quality. So oysters are not only good for us to eat, they're good for the environment. They're doing really great things. While they're on the farm, they're providing habitat and they're filtering the water. And that's all really important to the water that they're growing in. So they will actually enhance the environmental quality of the place they're grown. So that's pretty cool. Okay, you can see here, just they get a little bit bigger. So this size oyster that I'm holding in my hand here has probably been in the bay on the farm for maybe 6 weeks or so. They grow up pretty quickly. As they grow, you can see here the racks that you see on the bags you see on the racks have a much wider mesh. So these are probably year-old oysters in these bags. It will take us about 2 years to grow an oyster from that baby seed stage to a stage that is ready for market. And during that time, there's plenty of care happening. So you might stock a bag initially with 10,000 little tiny baby oysters. And as they grow, you're going to split that bag in half, the number of oysters in half again, and then just keep doing that. So that ultimately in that final stage of grow out, the oysters are maybe they're 150 to 200 in a bag. So if you have, you might start with 300,000 oysters that you can hold in your two hands when they come from the hatchery, and then you end up with hundreds of bags on the farm of these oysters growing out. One of the things we do on the farm is we're constantly trying to improve what we do, enhance our methods, get better survival, produce oysters that are higher quality, and get more of them. So we do a lot of experimentation, and with my science background, that's one of the things I bring to the farm, are kind of like, oh, let's think about how we can do this better. And this slide shows a couple of different types of containers we were evaluating for growing those very, very tiny animals that come right from the hatchery. And here you can see some market oysters just before they're ready to go to a restaurant. So all during this time on the farm, especially during the summer season, there's a lot of work to do. The oysters are growing rapidly, so you're constantly trying to keep up with them and keeping the bags at the right density so the oysters don't get too crowded and you get plenty of good food. You're sorting out fast growers from slow growers, market oysters from sub-market oysters, and we're also doing a lot of cleaning of oysters because this environment has a lot of sediment in it. And there are also a lot of organisms that like to live on and around the oysters. They're terrific habitat. And so you'll end up with all kind of critters growing on the oysters that can affect their quality. So every oyster on our farm will get washed once a week during the summer season. And we do this with high pressure hoses, as you see here. We're just pumping the ambient water from the sloughs in between the sandbars and washing the mud off the oysters. That's very tedious and time consuming and hard, a pretty hard job. Again, more sorting, always more counting. Our season runs, ideally, we'd like to be selling oysters from March at least until New Year's Eve. And then if it's a harsh winter, we stop and just take a rest and let the oysters hibernate. In the wintertime, if it's a very mild winter, we might sneak out and harvest occasionally. But you can see here, if you're an oyster farmer, I mean, this is a beautiful sunny day in this image, but it was absolutely freezing cold. So you have to be pretty hardy. You have to like the outdoors and enjoy all kinds of weather conditions, because you can't just walk away from the farm. You really need to stick with it and tend to it all the time, except for maybe those 2 months in the winter when the oysters are just kind of like quiet, hibernating, not growing, and there's not much happening other than ice and winter. There's a lot of quality control is important when you're out on the farm. That's one of the benefits and perks of being an oyster farmer. You get to eat fresh oysters right from the water. And that's really amazing. If you ever get the chance to come out to the farm and have some freshly harvested oysters, you'll be amazed at actually how delicious they are when they're super fresh like that. More sorting, more handling, more quality control. I like being on the farm. It's a good time to kind of clear your head and be a part of nature, but it's also a time to develop friendship and have conversation and engage in our crew and community. So I think that's a big part. Sweet Amalia, we try and really support one another and enjoy each other's company. And, we're always learning from each other and having fun on the farm. Well, not always. Some days it can be pretty bad, but most days we are having a good time. We developed a special boat to work the farm. It's kind of challenging when you have, these tides coming in and out and you have the sandbars. So we had worked with an architect and a steel fabricator to construct a boat with wheels. And so this boat serves us fine. Ideally, we would float out on the falling tide, work the farm on the sandbars and roll around while we're out there. And then once the tide starts to come in, we would float back in. So that's been a real workhorse for us and a great asset to the team. And it was pretty cool to work with the architect in developing this special boat that has, all special features and tables that interlock and come off and can be set up on sawhorses. So I mentioned that the tide changes daily. Here you have a sunrise tide that we're working, and here you have a sunset tide that we're working. So I have a library of just amazing skies. The farm can be so amazing in terms of what's happening around you in nature. The wind, the water, the air, the sky. It's pretty incredible. And, I really feel, blessed to have that opportunity to be out in nature and doing something that I enjoy and just experiencing the environment. There's a quiet day. Whoops. This is how the bay can look in winter. We can actually get the farm covered with ice. And, every winter it's a little bit of holding your breath to see how you survive the winter. We actually moved the entire farm from the sandbars to those sloughs. That's what we're in the process of doing right now, so that the oysters are a little bit protected under the water. And that's tedious and a lot of hard work and labor, but it does help get through the winter. Okay. Right. I do want to, I mentioned a little bit about oysters being good for the environment. There's just more and more studies that are demonstrating that the actual gear that we put out with the oysters is really terrific habitat for a lot of different species of finfish, blue crabs. The oysters with their hard shell, a lot of invertebrates will settle on them and grow on the oysters, and that becomes a food source for these fish that are moving through. And the oysters are cycling nutrients. They're pulling nutrients from the water column and then, recycling it so it's down onto the bottom. And these are all really important. They're in the science world, we call them ecological services. They're benefits that the oysters provide. So whether oysters are on a reef in nature, growing in the wild, or on a farm, they're doing great things for the environment. So shellfish farming is probably one of the greenest food production systems on the earth, in that there are these environmental benefits that happen just as you're growing the oysters or the hard clams, whatever species. Okay, so one of the things I like about the farm, in addition to being out in nature and, just enjoying that aspect, is meeting new people. And I feel like oysters are a tremendous connector of people. A lot of people are just curious and interested, whether you're eating them or you want to learn about sustainable aquaculture. This is a group of interns I had out one summer, and we encourage volunteers to come out. We encourage student interns to come work with us and spend some time. And we're very flexible. So even if a student has, 3 weeks in between jobs, or 3 weeks, before their job starts, they can come out and we'll try and plug them in and give them an experience and let them learn about this type of sustainable farming and learn about the bay environment and marine sciences. We have shuckers and chefs come out to the farm, and the image on the right is the Philadelphia roller derby team came out and worked with us one day. Basically, if you come out to the farm, you're most likely going to be given gloves or asked if you want a work visit or just an observational visit. But a lot of people like the work visits, and it's super fun to have people out. So again, I think it's so neat to have, oysters as this connector, whether you're working the farm, you're eating oysters, you're gathering with your family and friends. It's an important aspect and something that makes me feel really good about what I do. And this is our very fit team that's able to jump in waders. That's not easy to do. Okay, so I think I am going to end there and pause for some questions. Hopefully I didn't run too long. Am I okay, Tasha?
No, not at all. Thank you so much, Lisa. Okay. Thank you. That was an amazing presentation. It was beautiful. The photos were just gorgeous to watch. I didn't even know there was so much to know about oysters. But one thing, Lisa, is that there are a bunch of questions. I am pulling up the chat now. Okay, so first question from a Fishadelphian is, do oysters grow well together with any other bivalves or similar creatures in aquaculture?
Yes, so it really depends on the environment. So if you were at a farm on the Atlantic coast where the water tends to be saltier, the suite of bivalves in that area could include hard clams and bay scallops, and you'll see them growing. Actually, wild bay scallops will settle in the oyster bags and grow in the bags. Hard clams will grow all around them. Mussels, we often find mussels, barnacles, blue crabs inside the bag. So lots of different critters will grow in and around the farms.
Wow. Okay. Awesome. Another question is, when is the oyster season, and why did you, when you said, you should only eat oysters in months that end in R?
Yeah, so that really isn't true anymore. Okay. I think that's definitely a holdover from before refrigeration was, really good. And also, some people didn't like eating oysters in the summer months because they would be spawning and going through their natural reproductive cycle. And that can change the texture of the oyster somewhat and the flavor. So they're a little bit creamier. So it's not always the most popular thing to do. But right now, in terms of the current day market, the biggest market period is the summer season when people are out and it's warm and they just want to eat fresh seafood. And so it actually is the opposite nowadays. We're selling more oysters during the summer months without the R's than we are during the R months. But I think personally, I think oysters are best in the spring and the fall. And, you know, I'm a big fan of R month eating. So eat more
That's
oysters
really
during the R months.
That's super interesting. I've never even heard about the R months. Thank you very much for that question, because yeah, now it's like in my head now, R months, but we can eat during the R months, says Lisa. Another question is, how do other factors like temperature, wave action, etc., affect oyster flavor?
Yeah, so I imagine the wave action in those aspects, more than affecting the flavor, are gonna affect the shape and how the oyster grows and looks.
Oh, interesting.
So, and just the type of gear that you're putting it in. So, you know, sometimes I use those, you saw those oval containers that I'm starting the babies in. And those oval containers give the oysters a lot of room to roll with wave action. So they tend to tumble more. And that actually enables them to get a deeper cup. So while it's probably not impacting the flavor so much, at least the wave action, it is impacting how they look and how they're shaped. Temperature is a different story because the temperature really drives the reproductive cycle of the oyster. So you would have like, early summer season, the oysters might be spawning, so the texture might be a little bit different. And I think there is probably a change in like the degree of sweetness in the oyster as you move through. But I haven't actually, done a rigorous study on that. That's just my impression.
Nice. Okay. Well, there's always
interesting
time.
Question. Yeah.
There's time to figure it out.
Right, next year.
Yeah, right. Another question is, do you have to deal with predators, especially for the baby oysters?
Yeah, so one of the reasons we're holding the oysters in the containers is to exclude the predators. Mm-hmm. So at my site, we don't really have that much trouble with predators. We will have birds that will sit on the bags and peck through and eat the oysters. And sometimes you get a blue crab in that can nibble the edges of the really small oysters and eat them. But there are main predators at our site. And as long as the oysters are mostly contained, we can avoid that predation.
Got it. Do they naturally another question is, do they naturally reproduce in the bags?
Yeah, so oysters naturally are, they broadcast their eggs. So it's all like the eggs, they'll produce like a single oyster will produce 8 million eggs, and they're just released into the water column and dispersed by the currents. So you'll have a population of oysters that will be triggered to spawn all synchronously by a temperature cue. And once one oyster starts, like all of them will kind of spawn at the same time. And so the eggs are actually fertilized in the water column, and then they just are dispersed off with the water currents.
That's really, it sounds very alien-esque.
Maybe.
I mean, but it's not. That's so weird and so cool.
Yeah, so we're actually seeing some areas like in Barnegat Bay where the wild populations of oysters, like the natural reefs, have declined, and there really aren't big populations anymore. The oyster farms are helping bring back those oyster populations because the farmed oysters are actually spawning, and the oysters from those are not staying necessarily right on the farm. They're being broadcast to other areas. So it helps restore wild population as well.
Interesting. Awesome. Another question from a Philadelphian is, well, I believe you touched on it, and I noticed the question kind of came in and then you touched on it after, but we'll go back to it. Do you farm year round?
So yeah, I mean, I only if it's a mild winter. I haven't really, usually we're so tired by the time New Year's Eve rolls around. It's good to just be still and easy and take a month and a half off or 2 months off. But by March 1st, we are definitely out there. What happens in the wintertime is if ice comes in, all those racks get pushed down flush with the sand, and they all have to be dug up. So, and you have to get the oysters out of the sand before the water increases and they wake up. So there's a lot of work right about the 1st of March. But this year it's supposed to be mild, and maybe we'll get out. We have plenty of oysters this year. So maybe we'll get out and we'll still be selling them.
Last winter, it wasn't a harsh winter, was it?
Last winter was not a harsh winter, but I had sold all the market-sized oysters, and then really the oysters aren't growing any in the winter.
Right.
So you're not going to see more come to market size until the temperature warms up and there's food in the water. So that was kind of like that pivot.
Right. Okay. Another question is, what advice would you give someone who is interested in getting into aquaculture as a profession? Is a background in marine culture necessary?
I think it helps to understand the marine environment, but it's not necessary. I know plenty of farmers who have come from other fields. I know a lot of farmers who started in marine science and even had careers in marine science and then switched and grew, to oyster farming. So I would say it helps, but it's not necessary. And the main advice I would give to someone who's interested in it is just go spend some time on a farm and, really get your hands wet and make sure it's, something that it sounds great a lot of times, but once you get out there and, the weather it's hot or it's cold or it's, the bugs are biting and you realize how physical it is,
right.
It ends up not being for everyone.
Right. Awesome. Another question is, the video said you lost about 40% of your oyster once. What does that mean?
So that was a case where that winter, it was pretty mild, except for there was one really, really cold snap where we had extreme low tides. So the oysters were out of the water, like not just for 4 hours, but for like 7 hours.
Okay. Twice
a day. And then there were these like really, really super low, in the low teen temperatures. And I think it was too cold for them. So they froze. And so when, the oysters started to wake up, a lot of them did not survive that winter. That was definitely like a winter temperature kill.
Got it. Another question is also, how has current public health crisis affected your business? This business?
So the pandemic's been really hard for shellfish farmers. Most shellfish farmers rely heavily on restaurant trade. So if you're not selling directly to a restaurant, you're selling to a wholesaler who's selling to a restaurant. And when the restaurants closed, the sales just stopped. And it wasn't like you could just walk away from your farm because the work didn't stop. You still had to tend the oysters and take care of them. But what happened was you didn't really have the revenue coming in to support those efforts as they were happening. So a lot of farmers ended up with oysters that grew actually too large for their ideal market. Like that half shell trade is kind of focuses more on maybe a 3-inch oyster, a little bit smaller. And, if you weren't selling those oysters that were growing into market off your farm in the spring, they were still growing through the summer and they grew into sizes that were too big. So now there are some programs where we're using those oysters for habitat restoration. But so farmers in our farm with the restaurant closure, we lost sales. And, you know, it also impacted us by the way, you know, our employees availability, you know, if our, you know, one of my employees has young children. So it was hard for her to put hours in with her son home and doing online schooling. And so there were, you know, a lot of impacts like that. That fortunately the summer sales were, you know, quite good. And now, like for Philadelphia, that just with the closures this week, everything is, you know, we're not really selling oysters in the city that much again. So,
yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that, Lisa. Okay, so everyone, there's still a bunch of other questions, but we are actually going to leave that for the second part of the Q&A. Anybody else? Can everyone hear me?
now
we can.
Back now.
Oh, I apologize. Okay, so I'm good. Awesome. Thank you about that. I saw the screen went black. I'm like, no. Okay. So I know that there's been a lot of questions about the next topic. We've had a bunch of customers ask this, and even myself, I've been super curious. We want to show people how to shuck oysters with an oyster shucking demonstration by Chef Eli Collins, Lisa Calvo's friend. Followed by some tips on safe handling and nutrition. Chef Eli Collins actually filmed this video today in Philly just for us. So please enjoy the video, and we'll follow with the video with with the questions and an open discussion afterwards.
Hi, I'm Eli Collins from A Kitchen and Bar. We're located at 18th and Walnut on the southeast corner of Rittenhouse Square. I just want to take some time and show you guys my way of opening up the Sweet Amalia oysters, which I think are the best oysters on the East Coast, and we're so grateful to be able to serve them at the restaurant. So the way I teach my cooks and the way that I've sort of come up with, I think works really well for these oysters, is really two simple things. One is the proper way to roll your towel when you open the oysters. So what you're going to have is you're going to have a flat or a square dish towel, fold it 4 times like that, and then you do a tight roll so that you have almost this lever-like action. I always open my oysters on a tray so that I don't spray shell or anything on the rest of the table. And what I do is I take the oyster and I put the curved side downward. The nice thing about these oysters is they're pretty easy to open. And then if you want to zoom in a little bit, what we're going to do is we just nudge our knife right inside that crevice and then just apply enough pressure to twist the shell so that you just pop it open, all right? And then you clean your knife, pop it open a little bit more, and at this point, you run your knife straight across the top of it, okay? So that you've really exposed the oyster but not punctured any part of it, okay? And then the tricky part is you slide your knife underneath and free the oyster from the bottom of the shell. And that way you get this beautiful oyster. And the key to opening the oyster is that it looks like you just lifted the shell off the top of the oyster. Here at A Kitchen, we like to serve our oyster with a mignonette sauce, which we change regularly. It's a really fun thing for us to come around. And also not necessarily we serve it with this, but we do have some house-made hot sauce that we made from summer peppers that we received through that season. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy this instruction, and happy shucking.
Awesome. That was fantastic. Lisa, I also, excuse me, hi. So we also have some nutritional and some eating, handling and nutritional facts that Lisa's going to go through.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again.
And those oysters look so delicious, by the way.
Okay, so first, everyone should know that when you're buying your oysters, they are live. So I could actually bring them back out in the bay after they're harvested and in the refrigerator for 2 days, and they would just perk up and start to grow again. So you have to handle them. You have to absolutely make sure they're refrigerated. And they should be refrigerated in an open container. You don't want to tie them tight in a Ziploc bag or anything like that. You can take the mesh bag that they're sold in, if they're in a mesh bag like I'm selling, and just stick it in a bowl, stick it in your refrigerator. You can cover it with a damp cloth or paper towel, that's great. But you don't need ice, you don't need water, you don't need to soak them in water. They're not like clams that they're going to spit out sand. A lot of people will soak clams in water with corn meal or something. But you absolutely need to make sure that you're not, mishandling them in terms of temperature. You got to keep them on ice. If you're outside and you're having a picnic and, somebody's shucking oysters and they're out for a couple hours, you want them tucked in ice, not sitting in water. Always maintain cool. And that's absolute. If you see an oyster where the shells are actually open, you should not have oysters with open shells. You don't want to use those oysters. Sometimes they'll like gape a little bit, and then if you touch it, it will, it'll shut itself. The muscle will close the shell. If it stays open, you want to throw that out. You don't want to use that. And a lot of times too, if you just shake the bag and there's a oyster that's slightly open, you'll hear the difference. It'll sound kind of clunky as opposed to like a higher pitch. And then you'll know to like look for an oyster that you don't really want to eat. Okay, so like Eli, I liked his method. One thing that he didn't mention is you'll see when you look at your oyster, there's typically like a more cupped valve or shell and a flat shell. So you always he had the flat shell up facing him when he was shucking that oyster. And if you do that, you'll know, like you have that, the hinge area where he stuck the knife. If you have that back facing you, you know that the muscle, there's one muscle that's holding both shells tight, is going to be on the right side. And that's what he cut when he ran the knife along. So just a little added detail there. If you're new to oyster shucking, I think that towel method is a good method. You might want to wear a glove on the hand you're holding the oyster with anyway, just to be safe. A nice, big, thick, sturdy glove will work great. Like Eli, I love mignonettes with these oysters, or just lemon, just a little squeeze of lemon is perfect. But the mignonettes are so fun because you can really change them up. And it's basically about a vinegar base, and you add chopped shallots, and then you can add a little lemon, crush a black pepper. You can put in any kind of herbs. Like I like my traditional one, I usually use thyme. And sometimes you can mix vinegars. So like you might mix a red wine vinegar and a cider vinegar, or you might use like a white wine vinegar and a red wine vinegar, or just a red wine vinegar. So that kind of creates a little nuance, a little new flavor. We've done some with like chives, and ginger is very good in a mignonette. And you can, I mean, the sky's the limit. Just use your imagination. And that's a really fun thing to have with oysters too. So not everyone likes to eat raw oysters. I get it. You know, it's a little squishy. Can be a little creepy, I guess. So you can do other approaches with them. I'm going to show you some slides on that. I forgot. I really wanted to highlight about oyster nutrition. And oysters are super good for you. I mean, it's a really great heart healthy food. They're low in fat, they're high in protein, high in omega-3s, fatty acids, which are so good for our brains. Rich in minerals. Uniquely, they have selenium, zinc, which is good to fight off COVID, iron, potassium, magnesium, and then rich in vitamins B12, A, and C. So really terrific nutritional source. They're not just delicious and fun to eat, but they're super good for you. Okay, so for those of you who don't like the raw oyster thing, I have some suggestions. You can shuck them and you can fry them. So the way I like to fry oysters is I like to use rice flour and some salt and pepper and nothing else. Like just mix it up in the rice flour, hold it for an hour or so in that, and then fry them up. This particular treatment, I think, looks like it has some cornmeal too. Again, you can experiment. You don't necessarily need to be dipping in milk and other things, an egg. You can just go straight with the flour, the dry ingredients, and there's usually enough moisture around the oyster to grab it. But again, experiment, right? So that's always delicious way to eat them. But also, if you have a barbecue grill, or even if you want to do in your oven, you can shuck them, do a little like herb butter, throw the herb butter on top, stick them in the oven at a high temp, maybe 425, 450, put them on the grill, and just wait until the butter starts to bubble. You don't want to like super overcook them. Just get that butter nice and bubbly, and then throw on some breadcrumbs. Delicious, very simple, very easy, super, super yummy. So that's an idea. And then if you really you want to go straight, easy, this is actually an oyster that we did in the oven with just a piece of guanciale, but you could use like a little piece of bacon. And we had some fresh rosemary lying around, so we threw a sprig of rosemary on there, little burst of maybe some sea salt and a crush of pepper. Perfect, very delicious treatment. And yeah, so there, I think that's all I have there. Oh, yeah, that's all I have there. But just a few ideas. And hopefully you'll all share some recipes with us during this discussion.
Yes, awesome. All those pictures of oysters just made me drool. Fanny, the drooling emoji was completely appropriate. Because I was feeling the same way. They're so good. They look so good, and I didn't even know about the nutritional value, like that they're high in potassium. Like that's so cool. And also, shameless plug, but Fishadelphia also offers oyster shuckers that we sell through our website. So anybody can always just check us out, order some oyster shuckers if you don't have them already. So we actually are, so I want to just make sure we stay on track with the time frame. So I just want to lead probably like a 5-minute Q&A just to catch up on all the questions. And also, but this is also an opportunity for anybody that'd like to open up their cameras to turn on your cameras. I would like to, just because of the sake of time, I want to have an open discussion, but I feel like maybe it would be easiest if everyone that has a question, or if anything that they want to like let us know, if they can just type it in the chat, and I would just read it out loud to Lisa, just for the sake of time. So Lisa, there is a question here that says, how do we make that oyster dressing shown in the picture? It looks delicious. I believe you said it was a mignonette?
Yes, so that's just red wine vinegar, chopped up shallot, maybe, yeah, I guess you probably want proportions. I don't know, half a cup red wine vinegar, 2 tablespoons chopped up shallot, squeeze a lemon, little salt, little pepper, and some herbs if you have them, thyme, but not necessary. You can just do the vinegar.
Awesome.
And then again, I think that was probably red wine. I mix it up all the time. Sometimes it's cider vinegar and sometimes it's, white wine vinegar. So you can't go wrong.
Got it. Awesome. I hope that you wrote that down. The next question is, how often do you steam oysters? I heard that it makes it easier to open.
Yeah, I hardly ever eat steamed oysters. I did try it not too long ago because I felt like it would be an easy treatment for people that weren't comfortable trying to shuck them. And yeah, they were good. And I think I put them in a pot with a little white wine, and then I separately did like a herb butter that I kind of poured over them afterward. But again, the sky's the limit.
The sky is the limit. This is true. There's another question that I personally had. When you were talking earlier at the first part of the presentation, you were talking about wine pairings and just pairing things with what would you personally think pairs best with your oysters?
Oh, yeah. So, that was a fun visit because we actually visited Hawk Haven Winery in Cape May. And, we were looking to work with them to kind of collaborate because it's like we're both in Cape May and they make great wine and, we like our oysters. So let's mesh them. And that day we drank a Chardonnay and we drank our Riesling that was really, really nice. So generally white wines are better with the oysters and, kind of not anything super sweet, something a little drier. Some of the wines from, is it Australia, I guess, has some nice whites. And then there's the Sancerre from France, I think are good.
Awesome. Cool. Another question is, well, I'm not sure if this is a question or a statement. You folks had me grill them whole, pop them open a bit. It was fantastic and just lightly cooked, no shucking, just a little garlic herb butter on each and served. Ooh, that sounds so good.
Yeah.
Another question is there a place that collects oyster shells or for oyster habitats?
Yeah, so the folks at the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary are doing that. I'm not sure if they have Philadelphia pickups right now. I know there are some restaurants that are really interested in doing that, but it's really a tricky thing to manage because you have to be there all the time to get the shells. And but I would say contact the folks at the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary. If you're not familiar with them, they're a fantastic environmental focused nonprofit that really just focuses on the Delaware Bay and the tributaries. They do a lot of cool outreach and science and research and habitat restoration. Really good group.
Awesome. Another question is, what's the hardest part and the best part of being an oyster farmer?
Ooh, the hardest part is definitely about a timing thing. Is the third week of July when the temperature is soaring and the greenhead flies are biting. That's the worst. Just trying to get through that week. There's usually a ton of work on the farm and the conditions are just dreadful. So that's definitely the worst part, the worst conditions, and kind of like being home in the middle of winter and watching the temperature drop and just wondering how the farm is. That's pretty bad too. The best part, I think, is, well, there's so many, things. I mean, you have to really love it and you have to be passionate about it to do it because it is a lot of, hard work. And yeah, it's challenging in a lot of different ways. But I guess, I have really enjoyed the people that I've met because I'm an oyster farmer, which is kind of secondary to being on the farm. I love that. And I also just love being in the environment and experiencing the, nature and the way it's so dramatic and so beautiful and so always changing. It's like every day you go to the office, it looks different, So it's kind of like it gives you a new perspective, and it's very kind of humbling to be in nature and experiencing it at that close level on a regular basis. That's pretty special.
That was beautiful. Thank you. And so we actually have we actually have one more question. If anyone else has any other questions, this is your last call. Put them in the chat now before we wrap it up. And so another question is, the last question is, do you need to use an oyster shucker, or can you just use a screwdriver?
Yeah, I've seen people use a screwdriver. I have a feeling the shucking knife is a little safer.
Okay.
But yeah, it's probably worth the investment. Makes it a little easier. And the screwdriver definitely doesn't have that sharp edge to cut the meat off the bottom shell.
You all heard it here. Get an oyster shucker from
Fish. Have a screwdriver. Go ahead, give it a try.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Lisa. And everyone, we will give you all ways to contact Lisa if you have any other questions or anything like that. So what we'd like to, yes, thank you. Next slide is, it's not too late to join the season's Oyster Club. If you are not already in the Oyster Club, we have just 2 pickups left for the end of the season. Here's a slide with the information on how to do that. We're super excited to offer a promo code for people who have just attended this workshop. So I'm sorry, I'm just going to explain some of the pickups. We have a farmer's market pickup in Mifflin Square Park that is in South Philly. And we have cooler pickup that are actually on porch cooler locations in East Passyunk, Central South Philly, and 2 locations in West Philly. There's some prices there. You guys can all find out some more information on fishadelphia.com/sign up here, or just go to fishadelphia.com and click the prompts. So for the special promo code for everyone that attended this workshop, it's actually I Met Lisa. It gives you $5 off of a new oyster share, or extra oysters if you're already a member, or off of your spring subscription of Fishadelphia. So make sure you all write down or take a screenshot or like whatever you need to do to write down this promo code. For all of you that may have some questions for the spring pickup. Oops, sorry, Fanny, can we go back? Thank you. For the spring pickup, we have 6 shares. We're going to have 6 shares of fresh fish and shellfish. It's going to be on Fridays. The prices are there. All of our pickup information is there. Visit our website for more information, and also on our social media handles too. And we also would like you all to sign up for the spring season of Fishadelphia. Subscriptions give you locally caught seafood every other week, brought to a pickup location near you. You can feel free to reach out to us with any questions. Here's a slide with a $5 off promo code. It is I Met Lisa. You can use it again to sign up for our Seafood Club Spring Season, Oyster Club, or get oysters if you're already an Oyster Club member. And last but not least, here's a way to keep in touch with all of us. This is how you keep in touch with Fishadelphia. These are our social media handles. You can follow us Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Oh, and we're actually on TikTok now. You can follow us on TikTok as well. And here's ways to contact Lisa and stay in touch with Sweet Amalia Oysters. You can follow Lisa on Instagram and Facebook. Make sure to take a screenshot, and you can also email Lisa if you have any other questions or are interested in volunteering or any of those cool opportunities that Lisa was talking about today. Thank you all so much for your time. Thank you so much, Lisa, for being so amazing and, and just like educating us on oysters and what it is to be a farmer and how science and aquaculture meet. It's so cool. We look forward to meeting other having other Meet the Farmer events. Please let us know if there's a farmer you'd like to get to know better. We look forward to seeing you in the future at Fishadelphia Pickups. Take care, and please follow us and Lisa and Sweet Amalia on all social media handles. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
The fishermen are pitching pennies in the sand beside the sea. The sunrise hits their oilskin boots and their painted boats and me. They seem to know the ocean like a man knows a woman. She makes them wait around for half the morning for the tide to turn. Pull on the ropes, St. Paul fisherman never catches more than he knows he can sell in a day.
Okay. So good. So good.
Yay, it was so good. Yes, it was
Stop the
fantastic.
you could stop the recording.
Okay. Yes.
We have, sorry.